In the courtroom, Ilara, dubbed the Black Widow, faced certain conviction for multi-million-dollar fraud. With her future crumbling and all evidence stacked against her, the young defense attorney Sophia Hayes risked everything. When she presented an unexpected witness, a raven, the silence in the room portended the revelation of a dark truth. The murmur that followed Sophia's declaration was not one of comprehension, but of disbelief. A muffled, condescending laugh erupted from the prosecution's bench, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel reverberating through the room. "Silence!" Judge Beaumont's grave voice cut through the air, his usually impassive eyes fixed on Sophia with a mix of exasperation and curiosity. "Ms. Hayes, I understand the defense is under immense pressure, but this court is not a stage for farces. Explain yourself immediately, or this. Witness will be removed, and you will face sanctions." Sophia remained upright, her posture unwavering despite the visible skepticism surrounding her. On the makeshift perch beside her, the raven, a specimen of dark plumage and incredibly intelligent eyes, tilted its head, observing the scene. Its name was Corvus, and it was more than just a bird. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Sophia began, her voice clear and firm, "what I present is not a farce, but the only path to the truth. Corvus is no ordinary witness. His intelligence is extraordinary, documented by years of study. He was more than a mere pet to the late Mr. Blackwood. He was a constant companion, a silent observer, present in moments no human could witness." Ilara, seated beside Sophia, felt a wave of dizziness. She barely dared to breathe. The humiliation was excruciating, but beneath the veil of shame, a spark of hope, as faint as a butterfly's wing, began to flicker. Sophia was truly staking everything. "Mr. Blackwood," Sophia continued, "had a peculiar method of communication with Corvus, based on symbols and sequences of objects. He trained him to recognize patterns, associate people with events, and even specific sounds. Before his tragic death, Mr. Blackwood was obsessed with the idea that someone was trying to manipulate him. He entrusted Corvus with secrets, evidence he feared he couldn't protect himself." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. The prosecutor, Richard Vance, rose abruptly, his voice laden with disdain. "This is preposterous. We are in a court of law, not a circus. The defense is mocking these proceedings and the memory of the deceased. A bird cannot testify." "And he will not in the traditional sense," Sophia retorted, turning to face Vance. "But he can indicate, he can reveal." Mr. Blackwood, foreseeing something terrible, developed a system with Corvus to alert him if certain people or events were associated with threats. I asked the court for the opportunity to demonstrate how Corvus can guide us through the labyrinth of deceptions that led to Mr. Blackwood's death and the false accusation against my client. Judge Beaumont pondered, drumming his fingers on the table. The raven's gaze seemed to pierce the tension in the room, like a black hole absorbing light. The improbability of the situation was palpable, but Sophia's determination and Corvus's almost supernatural stillness prevented an immediate dismissal. "Ms. Hayes," the judge finally said, his voice softer but still laden with skepticism, "if you fail to prove that this arrangement has any procedural validity, the consequences will be severe. But given the gravity of the accusations and the absence of other eyewitnesses, I grant the opportunity. However, do not expect leniency if this proves to be a waste of time. How do you intend for this raven to indicate?" Sophia gave a small nod, an expression of gratitude and relief crossing her face. "Mr. Blackwood created a testing environment, Your Honor, a series of objects, some innocuous, others with hidden meaning. Corvus was trained to react to certain combinations, certain presences, certain sounds. He can show us what Mr. Blackwood saw and what he feared." Prosecutor Vance scoffed, disbelief evident in every fiber of his being. But the judge had spoken. Ilara's fate, once sealed by logic and circumstantial evidence, now hung in the balance, depending on the intelligence of a bird and the desperate audacity of her lawyer. The air in the room vibrated with the anticipation of an unprecedented spectacle. The silence that followed the judge's pronouncement was heavy, dense, with a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. Sophia, her heart pounding against her ribs, turned to face the court. "Your Honor, I request that some specific items be brought into the room. These are objects Mr. Blackwood used in Corvus's training and that hold particular significance for our demonstration." Vance rose again, a cynical smile curving his lips. "Are we going to have a magic show now? Where's the rabbit out of the hat, Ms. Hayes?" "The rabbit, Mr. Vance, is Mr. Blackwood, and he left us a path to the truth," Sophia retorted, her voice gaining firmness. "These are objects Corvus was conditioned to associate with key people, places, or events. He will guide us, not with words, but with his choices." Judge Beaumont, with a tired nod, granted permission. Within minutes, bailiffs, visibly uncomfortable with the task, brought in a small table and placed it in front of the jury box. On it, Sophia carefully arranged 5 objects: an antique pocket watch, a bronze quill pen, a small silver locket, a silk handkerchief embroidered with a monogram, and a polished, dark, irregularly shaped rock. Each of these objects, Sophia explained to the court, her voice projecting with clarity, was used by Mr. Blackwood in his method of communication with Corvus. The Raven was trained to associate certain stimuli with a specific object, indicating recognition or, in Mr. Blackwood's case, an alert. She looked at Corvus, who seemed to absorb every word, his black eyes gleaming. "Corvus, for this first demonstration, will indicate the object Mr. Blackwood associated with the idea of danger or betrayal." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience. Ilara felt a shiver. She had never known of such training. Sophia's audacity was dizzying. Sophia then turned to Corvus. She didn't speak aloud, but made a subtle gesture, a specific hand movement that seemed to be a signal. Corvus tilted his head, observing the objects on the table. The silence in the room became almost deafening. Every eye was fixed on the bird. Corvus descended from the perch with a short, graceful flight, landing on the edge of the table. He walked slowly among the objects, his small steps echoing in the tense silence. He sniffed the pocket watch, pecked at the bronze quill. Prosecutor Vance scoffed, a sound of disdain that broke the silence for an instant. Then Corvus stopped, his eyes focused on the polished rock. He nudged it slightly with his beak, then picked it up firmly, lifting it and letting it drop again with a dry clack that reverberated through the room. He touched nothing else. His eyes rose to Sophia, as if awaiting confirmation. "The rock!" Sophia declared, her voice choked with emotion, but maintaining composure. "This rock, Your Honor, was Mr. Blackwood's warning sign. When Corvus chose it, it meant he had witnessed something Mr. Blackwood considered a grave threat or imminent betrayal." A tremor ran through Ilara. She felt a pang of recognition, an almost forgotten memory. She had seen that rock before, on her husband's desk, but had never known its purpose. Prosecutor Vance, mouth agape, quickly recovered. "This is ridiculous. The bird merely chose the object that seemed most interesting to it. There's no proof that this rock has any meaning." "No, he didn't choose the most interesting," Sophia retorted, turning to the jury. "He chose what he was trained to choose. And the proof of its meaning will come as Corvus guides us through the events that preceded Mr. Blackwood's death." She knelt near Corvus, who was on the table's surface, and murmured something to him, a guttural sound that seemed like a secret language. Corvus emitted a low caw in response, a sound that, to those present, sounded like confirmation. But to Sophia, it was the signal that he was ready to continue. Judge Beaumont, though still skeptical, watched with more pronounced curiosity. The room, once filled with disdain, now held a strange mix of skepticism and a growing, reluctant fascination. The spectacle had begun, and the first act, however bizarre, had captured everyone's attention. Ilara's fate somehow now seemed less sealed. The air in the courtroom, once heavy with disdain and skepticism, now vibrated with an almost palpable curiosity. Corvus's choice of the rock had been a strange spectacle, but undeniably effective in capturing attention. No one openly scoffed anymore. Instead, fixed gazes followed Sophia, who stood tall again, her posture once more unwavering. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sophia began, her voice resonating with new confidence. Mr. Blackwood was not just a wealthy man, but an eccentric genius, obsessed with codes and signals. He foresaw the possibility that his death would not be natural, or that his will would be perverted. Corvus was his most loyal confidant, the silent guardian of his apprehensions. She gestured to a bailiff, who brought a small, dark wooden box. "Mr. Wood," Sophia continued, opening the box to reveal several objects, "trained Corvus to associate certain items not only with emotions, but also with abstract concepts related to his fortune and his will. Now, I will ask Corvus to show us what Mr. Blackwood considered the greatest deception regarding his final will." On the table, she arranged 4 more objects: a rolled parchment sealed with a wax seal, an ornate silver fountain pen, a stack of ancient coins, and a meticulously torn piece of paper, as if ripped from a larger document. The polished rock, the sign of danger, remained apart. "Corvus, indicate which of these objects Mr. Blackwood linked to the idea of will fraud," Sophia murmured to the bird, her tone soft, almost a whisper. She made another subtle hand gesture, a signal Corvus seemed to recognize. The raven descended from the table again, landing lightly. His bright black eyes swept over the objects. He pecked at the sealed parchment, then nudged the coins, producing a metallic clinking. The silence in the room was so profound that the clinking of the coins sounded like a bell. Then, Corvus stopped before the torn piece of paper. He looked at it intently, and a low caw, almost a lament, escaped his beak. He used his beak to nudge one of the torn edges, as if trying to reassemble the paper, failing repeatedly. There was an almost human frustration in his movements. Finally, he pecked at the torn part with surprising force, producing a dry, snapping sound. Afterward, he moved away from the object, turning his head to Sophia. "The torn paper," Sophia announced, her voice firm. "This object, Your Honor, was the symbol Mr. Blackwood used to represent the manipulation or destruction of his true will. He feared his will would be altered, fragmented." Ilara felt an electric shock. The evidence against her was that she forged the will, not that she tore it. That distinction, though subtle, was crucial. A new wave of hope, stronger than the previous one, flooded her. "This is just a charade, Ms. Hayes," Vance erupted, slamming his palm on the table. "The bird might be reacting to the paper's texture, to its movement. There's nothing to prove this supposed symbolic association." "The proof, Mr. Vance, will come not only from visual associations, but also from auditory ones," Sophia replied, unfazed. "Mr. Blackwood also conditioned Corvus to identify people through specific sounds that accompanied them. He knew that even without visual witnesses, the sounds would persist." She motioned to another bailiff, who brought a small audio device. Sophia picked up 3 small cards. "I have 3 audio recordings here. I ask the court to observe Corvus's reaction to each of them." The first sound was the gentle murmur of a water fountain, peaceful and harmless. Corvus tilted his head, observing. The second sound was the distant song of a bird, a sweet and melancholic melody. Corvus remained unchanged. The third sound, however, was different. A dry snap, like something breaking. followed by a metallic scraping noise, and then a low, harsh cough, almost an irritated clearing of the throat. It wasn't a common cough. It had a guttural, distinctive quality. As soon as the sound of the cough resonated in the room, Corvus stirred. His feathers ruffled slightly, and he let out a loud, hoarse caw, an alarm sound that made some jurors flinch. He pecked at the audio device furiously, as if attacking an invisible threat. "This sound," Sophia declared, her voice serious and grave, "was what Mr. Blackwood associated with the individual he most feared, the one he believed to be responsible for manipulating his will. It is the sound of an object breaking, a metallic drag, and the unmistakable cough of someone he considered a mortal threat." The murmur in the room was now not of disbelief, but of silent shock. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine, a sensation of recognition that froze her blood. She had heard that cough before, countless times, and it wasn't hers. Judge Beaumont, his eyes fixed on Corvus, seemed truly shaken for the first time. The demonstration had shifted from bizarre to disturbing. Pointing an invisible finger at a hidden truth, a secret the bird was determined to reveal. The air in the courtroom had been heavy, with a peculiar mix of awe and dread since Corvus's guttural caw. Ilara, frozen in her chair, felt the cold tentacles of recognition tighten around her. That cough, it was unmistakable. It had echoed through the halls of Blackwood Manor countless times, a familiar, irritating sound that now, in that sterile environment, became a harbinger of doom. It was the cough of Alaric Blackwood, Elias's younger brother, a man whose presence had always been a shadow in their lives. Sophia, sensing the profound impact of Corvus's latest revelation, allowed the silence to persist, letting the implications settle. Prosecutor Vance, usually quick to scoff, now merely shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his previous bravado replaced by visible unease. The jury members, their faces a canvas of shock, exchanged cautious glances. "Your Honor," Sophia finally broke the silence, her voice firm despite the weight of the moment. "Mr. Blackwood not only identified the threat, but also the person. This unmistakable cough belongs to someone he knew intimately, someone who, according to Corvus's training, represented a direct danger to his last will." Vance finally found his voice, though it lacked its previous aggressive tone. "This is pure speculation. The bird reacts to sounds, not identities. Where is the proof that this sound is linked to a specific person?" "The proof, Mr. Vance, lies in Corvus's continuous ability to associate," Sophia retorted, turning to face the jury. "Mr. Blackwood foresaw that his killer, or the manipulator of his will, could be someone close. Therefore, he trained Corvus to recognize not only objects and sounds, but also to whom they belonged." Sophia motioned to the bailiff again, who approached with a tray covered by a dark cloth. With a flourish, Sophia revealed 4 new objects, carefully arranged. A small gold locket with a lion engraving, a polished mahogany pipe, a pair of fine leather gloves, and a heavy signet ring adorned with the Blackwood family crest. "Each of these objects," Sophia explained, her voice projecting to the back of the room, "was associated with a key figure in Mr. Blackwood's life. The gold locket, for example, he used for Ilara, his love. The mahogany pipe for his old friend and doctor, Dr. Arthur Finch. The leather gloves for his longtime lawyer, Mr. Caldwell. And the signet ring." Sophia paused dramatically, her eyes meeting Ilara's. The signet ring belonged to Alaric Blackwood, Elias's brother. A muffled murmur swept through the room, transforming into a collective whisper of shock as Ilara felt everyone's eyes turn to the defense table. There, seated with his wife, was Alaric Blackwood. His usually pale face was now completely devoid of color. His eyes, previously fixed on Sophia, darted to the signet ring, and a nervous clearing of his throat escaped him, the same guttural clearing Corvus had just reacted to. Ilara felt a wave of nausea. That sound, that man, her husband's brother. Sophia knelt again near the table where Corvus was perched, his bright eyes fixed on the objects. She murmured something to him, a soft command inaudible to the others. The raven observed the objects with an unsettling intensity. He ignored the gold locket, passed by the pipe. He looked at the gloves, but didn't touch them. His light steps led him directly to the signet ring. He pecked it forcefully, producing a metallic clink that reverberated through the silent room. He then pushed the ring back and forth, as if trying to unearth something, before finally lifting it slightly with his beak and letting it drop with a heavy thud onto the wood. The silence was so dense, it almost hurt. "The signet ring," Sophia declared, her voice low but charged with a gravity that seemed to shake the very walls of the room. "Corvus indicates to us that the individual associated with this ring, Alaric Blackwood, is the same person, Mr. Blackwood, associated with the cough we just heard. He is, according to Corvus's silent testimony, the threat, the deceiver, the manipulator of Elias Blackwood's will." Judge Beaumont's eyes were wide, fixed on Alaric. Prosecutor Vance, stunned, couldn't utter a word. The courtroom erupted in a clamor of voices, muffled only by the bailiff's booming call for order. Ilara, feeling the room spin, couldn't tear her gaze from Alaric's livid face, who was now trying to rise, visibly trembling. The cold she had felt before had transformed into a chilling fear, a dark certainty that the truth would be even more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The bailiff's booming call for order echoed like thunder, struggling to quell the clamor that had erupted in the room. Judge Beaumont pounded his gavel with a ferocity he rarely displayed, his voice hoarse, demanding order. But order was broken. Shock and indignation were palpable, a murmur that soon transformed into cries of disbelief and fury. Ilara felt the floor spin beneath her feet. Her eyes were fixed on Alaric, her brother-in-law, the man who had always seemed a harmless shadow on the periphery of Elias's life. His face, once pale, was now stained a furious red, and he thrashed in his chair, trying to stand. His panicked wife clutched his arm, whispering inaudible words. The guttural cough escaped Alaric again, a hoarse, unmistakable sound that, in that moment, was the clearest confession imaginable. The cold Ilara had felt before had transformed into a chilling certainty. It wasn't just will fraud, it was betrayal. A betrayal planned by someone Elias loved and trusted, or at least tried to. The weight of the injustice she herself had borne for so long now shifted to Alaric, and the sight of his public humiliation brought no satisfaction, only a growing dread of what else might come to light. Sophia waited patiently for the judge to re-establish a minimum of control, her eyes firm and focused. When the tense silence finally returned to the room, heavy with anticipation, she turned to the jury. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sophia began, her voice projecting with clarity, "Corvus not only identified the threat, but linked it directly to Alaric Blackwood. The cough, the signet ring, the association is undeniable." She pointed to the ring on the table, where Corvus was still perched, observing the object with unsettling intelligence. Prosecutor Vance, regaining some of his arrogance, rose abruptly. "This is an outrage, a circus trick. The court cannot base a verdict on a bird's interpretation. I demand that this evidence be disregarded and that Mr. Blackwood be released immediately." To disregard the evidence would be to ignore the meticulous method with which Elias Blackwood trained Corvus, Sophia retorted, her voice unwavering. He knew that the truth could be distorted, but Corvus's nature, his ability to associate and memorize, was unbreakable. Mr. Blackwood feared his will would be altered, fragmented, like the torn paper Corvus identified. He didn't just fear a forgery, he feared the destruction of his true will so that another could take its place. She paused, allowing the distinction to settle. Elias Blackwood hid one last layer of protection, one that Alaric, in his greed, could never have foreseen. Corvus not only recognized sounds and objects associated with people, he was also trained to identify the action of manipulation. Sophia motioned to her assistant, who placed a small, dark wooden case on the evidence table. She opened it carefully, revealing a surprising object, a small silver inkwell, but not an ordinary one. This one was ornamented with a crest identical to Alaric's signet ring, a rampant lion. And beside the inkwell there was a goose quill, stained with dark, almost dry ink. This inkwell, Sophia explained, her voice low and full of meaning, was a gift from Alaric to Elias years ago. Elias, however, came to associate it with acts of dishonesty, realizing that Alaric used it for correspondence of dubious nature. And the quill? The quill was found in Elias's study, not long after his passing, with traces of ink that matched that of the forged will. Sophia extended her hand towards the bird. Corvus, Alaric Blackwood, the signet ring, the cough, and the act of tearing Elias's true will to forge a new one. Which of these objects did he use for the forgery? Corvus, who had been observing the scene with his usual intensity, let out a low caw. He descended from the table, his small steps echoing in the silence that had once again fallen over the room. He passed by the signet ring, which he had already identified. His bright black eyes fixed on the inkwell. He pecked it, producing a metallic clink, and then, with surprising force, knocked it over. The inkwell rolled across the table and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Next, the raven approached the quill. He pecked at it with a frenzy, pulling and shaking it as if trying to clean it of an invisible stain. A subtle but audible sound of tearing paper escaped his beak, a sound he seemed to replicate from memory. Finally, he pecked the tip of the quill violently, breaking it with a dry snap. The room exploded again. Alaric Blackwood, who had been in shock until then, let out a hoarse cry, a sound that blended fury and despair. He rose from his chair, eyes wide with terror, and tried to run towards the side door of the room, pushing people in his way. A quick bailiff intercepted him, and Alaric struggled, uttering curses and hysterical denials. "He's lying! That bird is a demon! I didn't do anything!" Alaric screamed, his voice shrill and broken as he was restrained. Ilara watched the scene with growing horror. Alaric's words, his uncontrolled fury, were more than a confession. They were the sound of a dark, still-hidden truth unfolding, revealing not just a crime, but a distorted soul. The icy terror now wasn't for herself, but for the darkness revealing itself around Elias Blackwood, a darkness that seemed endless. The courtroom was a whirlwind. Alaric Blackwood struggled in the arms of a bailiff, his sharp, uncontrolled screams tearing through the air. "It's a setup, a demon's trick. I didn't do anything." His voice broke into hysterical sobs, mixing with the shocked murmurs and cries of indignation that once again erupted from the audience. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine, more intense than the initial terror. It wasn't just the revelation of a crime, but the explosion of a fury so raw and desperate that it revealed a soul in ruins. Alaric's accusations, though denied, sounded like the most irrefutable of confessions. He seemed not just shocked at being caught, but terrified of the consequences. Judge Beaumont pounded his gavel with renewed ferocity, the sound echoing like gunshots in the room. "Order! Order in this court!" he bellowed, his voice almost hoarse. It took several agonizing minutes for the bailiffs to control Alaric, who was finally dragged out of the room, still shouting expletives and denials, his words fading down the corridor. A tense, heavy silence fell over the room, laden with shock and disbelief. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Sophia, who remained standing, impassive, beside the evidence table. Corvus, perched on the remains of the broken quill, seemed to observe the scene with serene gravity, as if the chaos was merely the inevitable conclusion of his task. "Your Honor," Sophia began, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the silence. "Given the irrefutable evidence presented by Corvus, Mr. Alaric Blackwood's implicit confession, and his attempt to flee, I request that an immediate arrest warrant be issued and that a full investigation into his conduct be initiated." Prosecutor Vance, his face red with humiliation, rose. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Blackwood's conduct is regrettable, but there is no concrete proof that he is the author of the forgery. The evidence of a bird cannot justify an arrest." Corvus's testimony is consistent, meticulously trained by Elias Blackwood himself, Sophia retorted without hesitation. "He identified the cough, the signet ring, the inkwell, and the quill. And, more importantly, he replicated the sound of tearing paper, the action that led to the destruction of the true will. Mr. Blackwood's attempt to flee and his desperate cries are merely the icing on the cake." Judge Beaumont pondered, his eyes sweeping the room, pausing on the overturned inkwell and the broken quill. The court's reputation was at stake, but the truth seemed to be there, clear as day. "Mr. Vance," the judge spoke, his voice grave, "Mr. Alaric Blackwood's conduct in this court is unacceptable, and combined with the evidence presented, raises serious questions. I grant the defense's request. Let an immediate arrest warrant be issued for Alaric Blackwood. This court orders a formal investigation into his participation in the alteration of the late Elias Blackwood's will." A wave of relief and surprise swept through Ilara. Her name was cleared. Freedom was within her grasp. But the relief was bitter, mixed with a dark premonition. Alaric's fury, his shouts about a setup and a demon. There was something more, an untold story, a deeper plot that Elias Blackwood might have tried to unravel before he died. Sophia turned to Ilara, a glint of triumph in her eyes, but also a shadow of concern. She knew the victory was only the beginning. "Ilara," she murmured, "you are free for now. But we still need to understand why." The jury, once skeptical, now seemed stunned, some exchanging glances, others observing Corvus with a mix of fascination and awe. The story had taken an unexpected turn, worthy of the most intricate novels. As the bailiffs prepared to clear the room, Ilara felt the eyes of a man in the front row fixed on her, Dr. Arthur Finch, Elias's old friend and doctor. His face was pale, and his eyes, once filled with sadness, now held an expression of shock and fear. A fear Ilara didn't fully comprehend, but which made her feel a new tightening in her chest. Had Alaric not acted alone? Or was there another, even more dangerous secret about to be revealed? The darkness she had felt before didn't seem to have dissipated, but merely shifted, revealing more menacing contours. Ilara's exoneration was just the prelude to the true hunt for the shadow lurking in the heart of the Blackwood family. The courtroom gradually emptied, a slow exodus of shocked faces and muffled whispers. Each scraping chair, each distant murmur, amplified the sudden void left by Alaric Blackwood's frantic departure. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the air heavy with adrenaline and tension dissipate. Freedom, for a moment, felt like a light weight, a feather in her hands. But the image of Alaric, his eyes wide with terror and his hysterical accusations, persisted, a dark stain on the newfound clarity. Sophia approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Well, Ilara, you're free," she said, her voice hoarse, but with a glint of victory. "For now, at least." Ilara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the door through which Alaric had been dragged. "He said, 'set up,' a demon's trick." "He really seemed to believe it, Sophia, as if there was something more." Corvus, who had remained impassive on the evidence table, let out a low caw, almost a lament. Before spreading his wings and flying to Sophia's shoulder, he gently pecked her hair as if comforting her, but his black eyes seemed restless. "Alaric is a greedy and cowardly man," Sophia mused, stroking the bird. But his desperation was unusual. There's a difference between being caught red-handed and seeming terrified by a greater threat. She swept the room with her gaze, then her eyes widened slightly. "Dr. Arthur Finch, he's still here." Ilara followed Sophia's gaze. Dr. Arthur Finch stood motionless in the front row, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them. His eyes, which had previously expressed a silent fear, now held an almost feverish intensity. When Ilara's and Sophia's gazes met his, the doctor recoiled a step, as if struck by an invisible force. He murmured something inaudible, turned abruptly, and hurried out of the room, disappearing down the corridor before they could reach him. A sound of a door closing reverberated through the almost empty space. "He's afraid," Ilara said, her voice low, a chilling premonition tightening her chest. "Why would he be afraid if Alaric was the only culprit?" Sophia frowned. "That's the question, isn't it? Elias Blackwood was always a reserved man, but never paranoid. If he trained Corvus with such precision to unmask a fraud, he must have had very, very strong reasons to fear, and not just a will, but the destruction of his true will, so that another could take its place." Sophia's phrase in court echoed in Ilara's memory. As they left the courtroom, the press outside was a sound wall of flashes and questions. Sophia, with Corvus still on her shoulder, shielded Ilara with a firm hand, making her way through the insistent crowd. "No statements at this time," she repeated, her voice firm, until they finally reached the car waiting for them. Inside the vehicle, the silence was a momentary relief. Sophia dialed a number on her cell phone. "I need everything on Dr. Arthur Finch," she instructed her assistant. "Every transaction, every call, every visit to Elias in the last 6 months before his death. And I want a team checking Alaric's residence and Elias's office again. Don't look for documents. Look for anything Alaric might have hidden, anything Elias might have left behind that he didn't want found. He was hiding something more," Ilara stated, more to herself than to Sophia, "something that terrified him more than prison." Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on the rapidly passing landscape. Exactly. Elias wasn't just protecting his legacy. He was protecting himself from something, and Alaric. Alaric is just the tip of the iceberg. The real battle is just beginning, Ilara. There's a deeper darkness here, and Dr. Arthur Finch knows it, and he's terrified. Corvus, on her shoulder, let out a sharp caw, a sound that seemed to agree or perhaps to warn. The victory in court was a breath of fresh air, but the weight of the hidden truth was an even heavier burden, a premonition of approaching storms. The car glided down the street, cutting through the city's hum into an almost reverent silence. The victory in court was indeed a breath of fresh air for Ilara, but the air inside the vehicle was dense, laden with the weight of the hidden truth that now hung like a cloud over them. Her eyes, once tearful with relief, now carried a shadow of apprehension. The image of Dr. Arthur Finch, pale and terrified, was a ghost on the screen of her mind, and the echoes of Alaric's shouts about a setup mingled with an unsettling premonition. Sophia, at the wheel, spoke in a low, urgent tone on the phone. "Yes, that's right. I want a complete sweep. Bank accounts, property records, medical histories, both his and Elias's, especially the last appointments before his death. There's something he's not telling us." She hung up, her fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. "My assistant will start digging. We have to act fast." Dr. Arthur Finch's fear wasn't that of a man shocked by a revelation, but of someone who knows too much and is about to be exposed. Corvus nestled on Sophia's shoulder, tilted his head, his black eyes fixed on Ilara. He let out a soft caw, almost a murmur, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Elias's quill, now a talisman in the lawyer's hands, seemed to vibrate with a silent energy. "Do you think Dr. Arthur Finch was involved with Alaric?" Ilara asked, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper. Sophia sighed. "It's possible, but the intensity of his fear suggests something more. Alaric is greedy. Dr. Arthur Finch is a respectable man, with an established life. What would make him risk everything, unless the reward was gigantic or the threat even greater?" She made a sharp turn, her eyes fixed on the road, but her mind clearly elsewhere. Elias trusted him. Arthur was his doctor, his confidant. If he was involved, it's a betrayal of epic proportions. Distant thunder made the car tremble slightly, a dark echo of the forming storm. Ilara looked out the window, the urban landscape becoming a blur of colors. Freedom was a strange taste, not entirely sweet, for the feeling of being on the edge of an abyss was palpable. Elias Blackwood's mind, she realized, was a more complex labyrinth than anyone imagined, and his plan with Corvus was not just to unmask an inheritance thief, but to expose something far more sinister. "Elias knew," Ilara murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "He knew there was something deeper. That's why he trained Corvus that way. It wasn't just the will, it was the destruction of his true will so that another could take its place." Sophia nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. Exactly. What else did he want to protect? What secret was so vital that he entrusted it to a raven rather than a man? And what did this true will mean? She picked up her cell phone again. "I need access to Elias's journals, everything he wrote in recent years, and any research he was involved in. He was a brilliant but eccentric man. Perhaps he left clues in his work." Suddenly, Sophia's cell phone rang. It was her assistant. "Daniel," she answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Sophia, I have something preliminary on Dr. Arthur Finch," Daniel's voice echoed in the car. "A few months ago, he sold a property on a remote Caribbean island, a cash transaction, well above market value, and the buyer is a known name, an offshore holding company linked to a series of shell corporations." Ilara froze. A remote island, a secret transaction, shell corporations. The web began to stretch, revealing the first threads of a conspiracy far larger than a simple forged will. "And the name of the holding company?" Sophia asked, her voice tense. "It's Umbra Corporis," Daniel replied, the hesitation in his voice palpable. "But the strangest thing is, I found that this same holding company made substantial donations to the Blackwood Foundation over the past 5 years. Anonymous donations, but traceable, and these donations stopped abruptly 6 months before Elias's death." A cold shiver ran through Ilara. Umbra Corporis. Shadow body. The darkness she felt wasn't just a metaphor, it was a name, an entity moving in the shadows, pulling the strings. Alaric wasn't the head of the snake, but perhaps just one of its scales. The true threat was far vaster and more insidious. The silence in the car was broken only by the distant rumble of thunder, which now sounded less like a storm in the sky and more like the roar of a lurking predator. The roar of the unseen predator seemed to tighten its grip around Ilara, stealing the air from her lungs. "Umbra Corporis," she repeated, her voice weak, the sound of the words evoking a chill that had nothing to do with the car's temperature. The name resonated with a sinister quality that went beyond a simple shell corporation. It was the echo of something ancient, something moving in the depths. Sophia was silent for a moment, her hand firmly on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The urban landscape, once a blur, now seemed too sharp, every building, every car a silent witness to the unfolding web. "Daniel, I need you to dive deeper into this," she finally said, her voice controlled, but with palpable urgency. Find everything you can about Umbra Corporis, owners, directors, transaction history. I want to know who the people behind this shadow body are, and the island. Look for records of any unusual activity there, anything linked to Elias or even Alaric. I'm on it, Sophia, Daniel replied, his digitized voice vibrating with similar tension. Dr. Arthur Finch's property sale was about 8 months ago, not 6. Forgive the lapse. And the island. It appears to be a known tax haven, but with a reputation for harboring more. Discrete operations. I'll try to cross-reference the donation data for the Blackwood Foundation with any research projects Elias might have had in recent years. Corvus, on Sophia's shoulder, let out a low caw, almost a warning, his black eyes fixed on the quill Sophia still held. Elara felt a shiver. The quill, given by Elias to Corvus, and now a link between the bird and the lawyer, seemed to pulse with a subtle energy. Elias hadn't just trusted Corvus with a simple message, he had prepared him for a war. 7 months before Elias died, the donation stopped abruptly, Elara pondered, her mind working fast to connect the dots. And Arthur sold the island 8 months before. This means something changed. Elias discovered something, or was about to discover it. Sophia nodded slowly. Exactly. Elias was a philanthropist, but also a brilliant scientist and an eccentric inventor. His foundation supported advanced research, much of it controversial. If Umbra Corporis was donating to the foundation, perhaps they were using it as a front, or perhaps Elias was investigating something that threatened them. The car stopped at a red light. The distant thunder was now closer, a deep sound that seemed to emanate from the ground, not the sky. A fine rain began to fall, softly tapping on the windshield. Elias was obsessed with data protection and privacy in his research. He always said that the true will of a brilliant mind was its freedom of thought, Sophia murmured, more to herself. He had a secret project, something he kept from everyone, including me. He called it Prometheus's Legacy. Elara felt her heart tighten. Prometheus's legacy, like the Titan who stole fire from the gods? Yes, Sophia confirmed, her eyes scanning the stopped traffic, but her gaze was distant. He believed that knowledge should be free, but that certain discoveries were so dangerous they needed absolute protection. He spoke of digital copies of consciousness, of eternal legacies. It sounded like science fiction at the time. A sharp hiss came from the speakerphone. Sophia, I have something. Dr. Arthur Finch was seen on a private jet, leaving Blackwood City Airport an hour ago. Destination, a small airport in the Cayman Islands. And the jet's crew is from Umbra Charter Services, a subsidiary of Umbra Corporis. Daniel's voice was tense, almost a whisper. He's fleeing. The air in the car grew cold. Dr. Arthur Finch wasn't just an accomplice. He was a pawn on the run. Arthur's fear in court wasn't that of a threatened man, but of someone who knew his time was running out. They're tying up loose ends, Elara said, her voice choked. They think they've already gotten what they wanted. Corvus, in a sudden movement, jumped from Sophia's shoulder to the car's dashboard. He pecked the front glass forcefully, then fixed his eyes on Elara. An intense gleam in his dark irises. Next, he flew to the back seat, landing on a folder Sophia had tossed there. The folder was ajar, revealing some documents. Corvus began to gently scrape the cover of one of them with his beak. Sophia looked at the raven and then at the folder. That's Elias's folder I took from his house. No one had looked at it yet, except to ensure there was nothing obvious. She reached for it and opened it. Inside were scientific articles on artificial intelligence and neuroscience. But Corvus was insistently pecking at a specific page, almost hidden beneath others. It was an old photograph, yellowed with time. In it, a young Elias Blackwood posed beside a man with a severe expression, both in front of a building with an owl crest and a symbol that looked like a twisted tree. The photo had a simple inscription on the back, written in Elias's elegant handwriting, "With Professor Thorn, the seed of Umbra." The roar of thunder echoed again, stronger and closer, making the car vibrate. The rain was now torrential, washing the windshield and the streets. The outside world seemed to have transformed into a deluge, reflecting the storm that now raged around them. Time was running out. Ilara felt a knot in her throat. Elias had left a trail of breadcrumbs, and Corvus, his faithful guardian, was leading them directly to the heart of the darkness. They were closing in, and the darkness was ready to swallow them. The name Professor Thorn echoed in the car, a menacing whisper that seemed to defy the roar of thunder. The torrential rain beat against the windshield, the city lights transforming into colorful blurs. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold temperature inside the vehicle. The photo in her hands was more than an old image. It was a door to Elias's past, a past he had kept hidden. Sophia took the photo with firm hands, her eyes fixed on the owl crest and the twisted tree. "The Ethelred Academy," she murmured, almost to herself. "An experimental research institute." Elias studied there for a short period before founding the Blackwood Foundation. They were known for their radical approaches to neuroengineering and artificial intelligence. But the academy was abruptly closed more than 30 years ago. There were rumors of unethical practices, experiments that went too far. Ilara felt her stomach churn. Experiments? What kind of experiments? Elias never spoke much about his time there. Sophia continued, her voice tense, only that it was a place of great promise and even greater danger. Professor Thorn was the director, a genius but also a man of flexible principles, let's say. He advocated the idea that human consciousness could be mapped, replicated, transferred. Elias's eternal legacies sound very much like Thorn's theories. Corvus let out a sharp caw, flapping his wings. He jumped from the dashboard to Sophia's shoulder, then extended his beak towards the photo, specifically to the twisted tree on the crest. "The seed of Umbra," Ilara repeated, the name fitting like a piece of a dark puzzle. "So, Umbra Corporis isn't just a company, it's an ideology. It started there, at the Ethelred Academy with Professor Thorn and Elias." Sophia shook her head, her eyes wide. If Elias was involved in founding this, then he wasn't just a victim. He was part of the origin, and if he distanced himself, perhaps he discovered something that terrified him. The implication was terrifying. Elias, the man she loved, could have been complicit in creating the very entity that now sought to destroy her. A gust of wind made the car tremble, the rain seeming to beat with more fury. The city outside was now a watery blur, and the world seemed to close in around them. "Daniel, I need you to investigate the Ethelred Academy," Sophia said, her voice a little hoarse, but with new determination. "Records, archives, everything you can find about Professor Thorn and his projects. And see if there's any link between Thorn's team and the current directors of Umbra Corporis. If it's a seed, then it must have sprouted somewhere." "Sophia, I have something about the island." Daniel's voice broke the silence of the speakerphone. "The tax haven where Arthur sold the property. I found records of a series of suspicious transactions in recent years. Payments to former Ethelred Academy employees, some of them renowned scientists who simply disappeared off the map after the Academy's closure. And most disturbing, I discovered that Elias Blackwood visited this island several times over the past 10 years. His last visit was 8 months before his death, right after Arthur's property sale. Elias wasn't just investigating, he was in the thick of it. He had infiltrated the very darkness he had helped create. "So he wasn't fleeing, Sophia," Ilara said, her voice almost a whisper. "He was closing in. He knew what was happening, and he tried to stop them." "They didn't want him to stop," Sophia replied, gripping the steering wheel. The car moved forward at the green light, but the road ahead seemed darker, more dangerous. Prometheus's legacy must be Elias's trump card, the way he planned to expose everything, and the forged will was a desperate attempt to stop him, to divert attention, to silence him permanently. Corvus flew to the back seat again, landing on the scientific articles Sophia had left. With his beak, he pulled one of the articles to the edge. It was a study on brain-machine interface and the conservation of post-mortem consciousness. The author's name? Elias Blackwood. The date? 15 years prior. A footnote mentioned a citation from a seminal work by Professor A. Thorne. He had been working on this for decades, Ilara realized, her eyes wide. Prometheus's legacy is the culmination of all his work. It is the true will they want to destroy. The rain hit the car with such force that the outside world seemed distorted, a watery gray blur. Lightning tore through the night sky, briefly illuminating the road ahead, revealing trees twisted by the storm, almost like the crest symbol. A thunderous crash made the car vibrate intensely. Sophia picked up her cell phone. Daniel, focus on Elias's research on Prometheus's legacy and any connection to the Ethelred Academy and Thorn. Look for any mention of a location, a secret server, anything Elias might have created to protect his true will. And we need a trusted neuroscientist and AI expert to help us decipher these articles. Sophia, I just received a report from a contact in Blackwood City Airport Security. Daniel's voice was more urgent now. It seems the Umbra Charter Services jet carrying Dr. Arthur Finch had a technical issue, forced to land on a secondary Caribbean island not far from the original destination. A minor accident, but no one was injured. Local authorities are en route. There's an Umbra Corporis team already on the island, apparently for assistance. A new chill ran through Ilara. Accident? Or are they ensuring Arthur doesn't speak? The question hung in the air, heavy and sinister. Arthur was a link, and if he couldn't be silenced, perhaps he could be removed. Sophia accelerated the car, the tires tearing through the water on the road. The original destination had changed. This was an opportunity, or an even more elaborate trap. Elias had foreseen this, the need for a guardian, and Corvus, with his sharp beak and keen eyes, was pointing the way, leading them deeper into the storm. The darkness wasn't just lurking, it was in motion, and they were right on its heels. Daniel's words about Arthur's forced landing resonated in the car, more menacing than any thunder. Sophia felt an icy chill that had nothing to do with the cold of the storm. Accident? Her voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible over the roar of the rain. Or are they ensuring Arthur doesn't speak? Ilara didn't answer, but her eyes, fixed on the watery blur of the windshield, mirrored the same dark question. Arthur was a piece, a weak link, and now he was in the hands of Umbra Corporis on an isolated island. Daniel, I need you to find out exactly where that island is and who else is on board that plane besides Arthur, Sophia instructed, her voice gaining a new layer of urgency. They want him silenced, but perhaps, just perhaps, he can still be rescued. Corvus, perched on Sophia's shoulder, let out a low caw, almost a lament. He stretched his neck, tapping his beak lightly against the car window, pointing outwards into the darkness of the night. It wasn't a destination, but a warning. Sophia, I have something on Professor Thorne, Daniel interrupted, ignoring the growing tension about Arthur. The Ethelred Academy wasn't just closed, it was swept from history. Records are scarce, almost non-existent. But I managed to get an unofficial testimony from a former caretaker who worked there at the time. He spoke of a sealed underground wing where the most sensitive experiments were conducted after the closure, and he mentioned a recurring figure, Not a student, nor an official professor, but a financier who was always around, a man named Arthur Vance. And the caretaker said that Vance and Thorne seemed to have a common goal, to transcend the limits of human existence. The name Arthur Vance made Ilara's heart leap. She knew him. He was one of Umbra Corporis's oldest directors, a discreet figure but with considerable influence. "Arthur Vance?" Ilara breathed, her voice trembling. "He's one of Umbra's main directors now. He and Thorne were working together from the start." Sophia nodded slowly, understanding deepening in her eyes. "So it's not just a seed, Ilara. It's a lineage. Vance inherited Thorne's legacy, or perhaps they were building this together all along, with Elias merely an initial collaborator. He must have pulled away when he realized the true extent of their ambition." Lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the facade of an old, imposing building ahead. The letters above the entrance were almost invisible under the rain. Blackwood Central Library. Elias was an avid patron, and his foundation had donated millions to the institution. "Daniel, contact Dr. Vivian Holloway," Sophia said suddenly, an idea forming in her mind. "She is one of the most respected neuroscientists in the country, with an impeccable record in ethics. She was a great admirer of Elias's early work and might be the only person who can help us decipher these articles without falling into Umbra's trap." Corvus let out a caw, flapping his wings and flying to the back seat again, this time landing on Elias's folder containing the scientific articles. With his beak, he pulled out a small leather notepad that was hidden between the pages. The pad, thin and worn, seemed to have been used for years. Sophia picked up the notepad. The first pages were meeting notes and reminders, but in the middle, Elias's handwriting changed, becoming more hurried, more urgent. "Ethelred, Laboratory C7, she read aloud. Her voice filled with apprehension. "Consciousness projection subject 0. Thorne and Vance are going too far. They don't care about souls, only about power. Prometheus's legacy is the only chance, protected in a digital mirror beneath the ancient oak." A chill ran through Ilara. Subject 0. Digital mirror. The ancient oak. The car stopped in front of the library. The rain now fell like an impenetrable curtain, and the wind howled, making the surrounding trees sway furiously. The sight of the ancient oak on the Ethelred Academy's crest, the twisted tree, returned to Ilara's mind. It was a symbol, but it could also be a location. "It seems Elias left a map, not just a will," Sophia murmured, her eyes scanning the notepad's pages. "And Professor Thorne and Arthur Vance are the guardians of a secret far darker than we imagined. Subject 0. That's what worries me most." The library door, though closed, seemed to invite them inside, into the heart of more mysteries. The storm roared around them, but the true tempest was only just beginning. Ilara felt a weight in her chest. The truth about Elias was more complex, more dangerous than she could ever have imagined, and the search for Prometheus's legacy was leading them to places no one had dared to explore. The heavy door of the Blackwood Central Library creaked open, swallowing the roar of wind and rain, replacing it with a muffled silence and the ancient smell of paper and dust. The interior, though majestic with its high ceilings and shelves that disappeared into the gloom, seemed abandoned, the dim lighting barely managing to ward off the shadows dancing in the corners. The storm outside still beat against the stained glass windows, creating distorted aquatic patterns on the polished wood. "Elias spent hours here," Ilara murmured, her voice echoing in the vast space. Her eyes swept over the endless rows of books, the sense of despair growing. "How are we going to find anything?" Corvus, who had flown high, circled above them before gently landing on the railing of a marble staircase. He cawed, tilting his head from side to side, his black eyes fixed on a particular section of the library. It was a darker area, almost hidden behind a large reference bookshelf. Sophia followed the raven's gaze. "He always guides us, doesn't he?" She took Elias's notepad from her pocket, rereading the notes. Laboratory C7. Subject 0. Digital mirror beneath the ancient oak. As they walked towards the section indicated by Corvus, Sophia's cell phone vibrated. It was Daniel. "Sophia, I got the exact location of the island where Arthur is," he said, his voice muffled by static. "It's a small private island, owned by Umbra Corporis for years, used as an exclusive resort. But now it's under heavy security, and Dr. Holloway. She agreed to meet us, but she has a warning. She said Elias's articles on consciousness projection are highly volatile, and that anyone attempting to implement them without the strictest ethical safeguards would be playing with fire. And she mentioned that Elias always had a fascination with folklore and certain legends about sentinel trees or trees of knowledge." Sentinel trees made Ilara's eyes widen. "The ancient oak," she whispered, understanding dawning on her. They finally reached the section Corvus had pointed to. It was a niche dedicated to local history and botany, but more specifically, there was a display case with ancient artifacts. In the center, under a dim light, was an intricate model of the Ethelred Academy itself, as it was before its closure. And at the back of the model, there was a miniature twisted oak, identical to the crest symbol, but with a small rusted metal plaque at its base. Sophia leaned in, straining to read the inscription on the plaque. The handwriting was worn by time, but the name was unmistakable. Oak of Wisdom, planted by A. Thorne in honor of the inauguration of the Advanced Research Wing, year 1957, located in the Academy's main square. The Ethelred Academy," Ilara breathed, her voice choked with emotion and fear. "It's a physical place, and Elias hid the digital mirror beneath it." Corvus let out a triumphant caw, flying from the model to Sophia's shoulder, tapping his beak on the notepad again. "Daniel," Sophia said on the cell phone, her voice tense, but with a trace of victory. "We need immediate access to the old Ethelred Academy. Prometheus's legacy is there, beneath the Oak of Wisdom in the main square, and find out what you can about this Subject 0. Elias mentioned him as an experiment by Thorne and Vance." The silence on the other end of the line was filled by a click. "Sophia, there's one more thing," Daniel continued, his voice grave. "My contact in Blackwood City Airport Security just called me back. The Umbra Corporis jet that landed on Arthur's Island. It was carrying more than an assistance team. There was a medical team on board, and they were preparing for an emergency removal." "Sophia," Ilara gasped. "Emergency removal? Of whom?" "Of Arthur, Sophia," Daniel replied, the urgency in his voice palpable. "He was under sedatives, and the preliminary diagnosis was induced memory loss. They didn't want him silenced, they wanted him to forget." Ilara felt the ground beneath her feet sway. It was mental torture, a way to erase the truth without leaving physical traces. Umbra Corporis's malevolence was even deeper than they imagined. The search for Prometheus's legacy had found a location, but the cost to get there, to unravel the mystery of Subject 0 and save Arthur, seemed greater than they could bear. The storm outside seemed to have calmed somewhat, but the true threat, silent and insidious, lurked closer than ever. The news of Arthur's memory, methodically stolen, froze the air inside the car, colder than any rain. The blow was not just against Arthur, but against truth itself, a cruel maneuver that erased witnesses without shedding a drop of blood. Ilara felt a knot in her throat, bile rising. Had Elias, her husband, been part of something so inhumane? The thought was a torment. "Daniel, Dr. Holloway, we need her now. Ask her to meet us at the Ethelred Academy. Tell her it's urgent," Sophia instructed, her voice firm, but with an edge of controlled fury. The sound of the car engine filled the heavy silence as they drove away from the library, the storm outside diminishing to a persistent drizzle. Corvus, on Sophia's shoulder, shook his head, his feathers ruffled, and let out a long, melancholic caw. He seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. The drive to the old Ethelred Academy was a blur of blurred streetlights and dark thoughts. The building, when it finally came into view, was even more imposing and decrepit than the model had suggested. It stood on an isolated hill, its sharp contours against the cloudy sky. Wrought iron gates, rusted and locked, guarded an entrance that seemed not to have been used for decades. The wind howled through the bare trees, lining the access road, creating a ghostly chorus. "This looks abandoned, forgotten," Ilara whispered, her voice hushed as Sophia parked the car near the gates. Wild ivy covered much of the stone facade, and some windows were broken, revealing the darkness within. A shiver ran down her spine. This place held secrets, but also the echo of dangerous experiments. Daniel called again. "Sophia, I got a security contact who still has access to some of the Academy's blueprints. The main square is at the back, just behind the main building, accessible via a side service path. The Oak of Wisdom is the only one of its kind on the property." "Great, we're at the gates now. Let's go in," Sophia replied, the determination in her eyes overcoming any apprehension. "And Dr. Holloway?" "She's on her way. She said she needs to see what Elias discovered with her own eyes." "She fears the worst," Daniel said, the connection failing a bit. "And Sophia, Umbra Corporis is intensifying security on the island. They don't want Arthur to remember anything. There are rumors that Vance is personally supervising the treatment." Ilara's heart leaped with fury. Vance! He was behind everything, manipulating, erasing, silencing. She clenched her fists, feeling a visceral desire to confront him. With the help of Daniel's blueprints, Sophia and Ilara found a side service gate, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. A rusty metallic screech dragged as Sophia forced the old lock, opening a path into the academy grounds. The air was dense with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The wind whispered through the ruins, and with each step, the sound of their own feet echoed in the oppressive silence. Corvus flew ahead, cawing softly, guiding them through a labyrinth of wild bushes and dead flower beds. Finally, they burst into a large, abandoned courtyard. In the center, majestic and imposing, stood the Oak of Wisdom. Its thick roots spread across the earth, and its twisted branches reached the grey sky like a silent guardian of bygone eras. The library model had not done justice to its magnitude. Corvus landed on one of the oak's lower branches and repeatedly tapped his beak on a specific spot at the base of the trunk. It was an insistent, almost furious movement. Sophia approached, her eyes sweeping the area. The oak's roots formed a kind of natural alcove. Crouching down, she felt the earth. Her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic, hidden beneath a layer of leaves and debris. Carefully, she began to dig, the damp earth clinging to her hands. Ilara joined her, her breath caught in her throat. Gradually, a rectangular object began to emerge. It wasn't a safe, nor a wooden box. It was a dark metal plate, smooth and cold to the touch, with a small display in its center, covered in dirt. It was an electronic device, but it seemed to have come from a bygone era, futuristic and archaic at the same time. The digital mirror. Sophia wiped the display with her jacket sleeve. A faint, bluish light flickered, and archaic symbols, mixed with modern binary code, appeared on the screen. Elias's handwriting, seen in the notepad, began to fill the display, as if he were dictating the words at that very moment. Prometheus's legacy is not an object, but a consciousness, a memory. Thorne and Vance didn't just want to prolong life, but to transfer essence. Subject Zero is not a person, but the first success, proof that a mind can be replicated. And mine, Elias, is within this mirror, waiting to reveal the complete truth. The ground seemed to give way beneath Ilara's feet. Elias had not merely hidden information, he had become the information itself. He had become Prometheus's legacy, a digitized mind, a mirror of his own consciousness, imprisoned and waiting to be discovered. And Subject Zero was the prototype. The revelation hit Ilara like lightning. Elias's true will was not about money or possessions, but about the soul itself. A sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the square. Dr. Holloway was there, her silver hair disheveled by the wind, her eyes wide as she saw the oak and the device in Sophia's hands. "My God," she whispered, approaching, her voice choked. He really did it. He replicated his own consciousness. "Elias, you became your own warning." The storm, which had lessened, began to intensify again. As if the sky were reacting to the magnitude of the discovery, the wind howled, shaking the branches of the Oak of Wisdom. The truth had been unearthed, and with it, the danger Umbra Corpus had worked so hard to keep buried. Dr. Holloway knelt beside Sophia, her fingers trembling as she touched the device's cold surface. The wind whipped the oak's branches, and the fine drizzle turned into heavier rain, washing the fallen leaves in the courtyard. The symbols on the digital mirror screen flickered with increasing intensity, Elias's handwriting becoming sharper, the implied yet powerful voice breaking the silence. "I knew I didn't have much time left," Elias began to write, the words appearing on the display. Vance was becoming bolder, more impatient. He wanted Prometheus's legacy, not for humanity, but for himself, to replicate his own mind and become immortal. Subject Zero was the first, not an experiment on an animal, but a human. Someone Vance considered disposable, a perfect guinea pig to test consciousness transfer. Thorne, my mentor, vehemently opposed it, but Vance silenced him, not with physical violence, but with threats to his research and reputation. Ilara held her breath, feeling the weight of the revelations. "Who was Subject Zero?" she whispered, her voice almost inaudible over the wind. The screen flickered and a name appeared. Arthur Thorne. A muffled cry escaped Ilara's lips. Sophia and Dr. Holloway exchanged horrified glances. Arthur, Thorne's son. He wasn't just an experiment. He was Subject Zero, the induced memory loss, Vance's treatment. Everything fit into a sinister pattern of control and erasure. Vance used Arthur to prove the viability of consciousness replication. Elias continued to reveal. He reprogrammed him, erasing his original memories, turning him into a blank slate, a vessel for what he called the perfect mind. I tried to stop him. I discovered he was altering my will, using my family's paranoia about Ilara to frame her, while he appropriated all my assets and research, especially the digital mirror and the technology to perfect the transfer process. He needed funds and my work to finalize the project and become the next. The will incriminating Ilara is a fraud. Vance altered it and forged the signature, using a method I myself developed for a security project, a method he stole from me. Ilara's icy fury intensified, overcoming her fear. She wasn't a manipulator. She was a victim of a macabre plan. The true will is encrypted within this device, along with all proof of Vance's atrocities and Arthur's complete medical history, showing the extent of his mind's manipulation. Elias concluded on the display, "It is my last will, the ultimate truth. Don't let Vance win. Save Arthur. Save the truth." A sound of dry branches snapping and heavy footsteps approaching made the three women flinch. Corvus let out a sharp, alerting caw, flying to the top of the oak, his wings beating frantically. "It seems we arrived at just the right moment, Doctor." A cold, calculating voice pierced the night air. From amidst the darkness and rain, 4 figures emerged, clad in dark cloaks, with Vance at the forefront. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction, his eyes fixed on the device in Sophia's hands. "Prometheus's legacy, finally," Vance said, extending his hand. "Hand it over, Sophia. You don't understand what you hold. This is the future, a new era for humanity, an era I will lead." "An era of manipulation and erasure, Vance," Sophia retorted, rising, the device held firmly in her hands. "You turned Arthur into a guinea pig. You forged Elias's will. You're a monster." "Small sacrifices for greatness," Vance sneered, stepping forward. His men advanced, surrounding them. The rain fell harder, and lightning began to tear through the sky, illuminating the scene with dazzling flashes. "We won't allow you to continue," Dr. Holloway said, her voice aged but firm. "Arthur's memory must be restored. The truth about Elias must be exposed." Corvus, high in the oak, let out a deafening shriek, launching himself from the branch. He flew straight at Vance, his sharp talons scratching the man's face. Vance recoiled with a cry of pain and anger, bringing his hand to his face, where thin lines of blood began to appear. The distraction was enough. Ilara, feeling a surge of courage, grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it at one of Vance's men, hitting him in the shoulder. He staggered. Sophia, seizing the momentary chaos, pressed a button on the digital mirror. The screen flickered, and then, with an intense glow, a three-dimensional hologram of Elias materialized in the air, hovering above the oak. His image was translucent, but his voice, clear and resonant, filled the courtyard. "Vance, your reign of terror ends here," Elias said, his voice echoing. "All your actions, your frauds, your inhumane experiments with Arthur, your attempts to appropriate my work for your own selfish immortality. Everything is recorded and being transmitted now to the police, to the world." A sound of sirens, still distant, began to cut through the howling wind. "Daniel, for sure." Dr. Holloway smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. Vance, with blood streaming down his face, looked at Elias's hologram with a mix of fury and pure terror. He tried to draw a weapon, but the men accompanying him, realizing the imminent arrival of the police and public exposure, hesitated. Vance's authority crumbled. "It's over, Vance," Sophia said, her voice filled with victory. "Prometheus's legacy is not yours. It is the truth." Corvus landed on Elias's shoulder, the hologram, and let out a soft caw, almost a purr. Elias's image flickered one last time and then dissolved, but the words and the truth he had shared would remain. The police arrived quickly. The blue and red lights of patrol cars cut through the storm's darkness, illuminating the courtyard and the Oak of Wisdom. Vance and his henchmen were surrounded and apprehended. Ilara felt an immense weight lifted from her shoulders. The relentless prosecution would no longer have circumstantial evidence. Now there was Elias's irrefutable truth. At the hospital days later, Arthur was still weak, but Dr. Holloway was optimistic. The information from Elias's digital mirror contained the precise protocols to reverse the induced memory loss. The process would be long and painful, but there was hope. Ilara was free, her reputation restored. Elias's fortune was earmarked for ethical research causes and a fund for Arthur. She found herself with a new purpose, a new understanding of the complexity of life and the human mind. Corvus, always by her side, seemed more serene, his work as guardian of truth finally complete. The raven was not just an intelligent animal, he was the link, the silent observer who had guided everyone to the truth, unmasking a dark conspiracy and bringing to light Elias's true legacy. Not physical immortality, but the immortality of truth. The sky in those days was clear, a deep blue that seemed to promise a new beginning. The storm had passed, and with it, the shadows that hung over Ilara's life had dissipated. She knew that the journey to rebuild Arthur's life and Elias's memory would be long, but for the first time in a long time, She felt the sunlight on her face, a warmth that filled her with hope and an unwavering strength.